Hi guys, it's Carolina Hidalgo from Last Podcast Network. I co-host a weekly podcast called Movie Sign with the Mads with Frank Conniff and Trace Bellew, the original mad scientists from the hit cult TV show Mystery Science Theater 3000. That's right, TV's Frank and Dr. Clayton Forrester, along with myself, spend each week discussing and thoroughly dissecting a movie we've recently seen.
The premise of our show is very complicated. I hope you can pay attention. We come in once a week and talk about a movie. Okay, I hope you could keep up with that.
Past episodes included classics like Taxi Driver, The Godfather, and Sunset Boulevard, to our live show recordings of The Shining, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, to newer releases like The Shape of Water, Hereditary, Get Out, and Mandy.
Some we like, some we don't. We agree, we disagree. But in the end, it's all about movies and you, the viewer, and your suggestions. The viewer, no, it doesn't come through that way. It's on the radio. It's on a podcast, and it's free.
There's no real continuity between the episodes, so click on the movie episode you'd like to hear about. Check us out on iTunes, SoundCloud, wherever you can find podcasts, or just look for us on lastpodcastnetwork.com under shows. Thanks, everyone, and enjoy the show.
Let the word go forth.
Fool me once.
Are you fired up?
I'm not a crook.
Are you ready to go?
Shame on you.
It's Abe Lincoln's Top Hat, hosted by Ben Kissel.
Fool me, we can't get fooled again.
Hello, everyone. It's Benjamin Kissel. Full name, Benjamin Grant Kissel. Yes, Benjamin Grant Kissel, BGK. Isn't that kind of fun? Thank you all so much for joining me today. I also have Travis Morningstar staring at my big face.
Travis Michael Morningstar. Morningstar is my real last name.
I know it, buddy.
It was an Ellis Island thing. I'm not trying to apply for a Hot Topic job.
Well, you'd get it in my book, my friend. You belong at Hot Topic, and that's a compliment.
Thank you.
No problem. We got a bunch of stuff to get to a little bit later on in this episode, folks. I am very excited to announce I'm going to be talking with, he is a Democratic candidate for president. His name is Andrew Yang, and this man, really fascinating. He will be in the debates in June and July. The DNC has already confirmed that, so he will be in the debates. And what they're doing this year with the DNC, they are doing 2 different debate nights. So they're going to try to avoid what happened with the Republicans. Of course, we know the varsity squad, and then they had the JV squad. So they had the B team and the A team. Lindsey Graham was over there on the B squad. Carly Fiorina actually was the only one, to my memory, that was able to jump up to the big leagues after a strong B-team debate or junior varsity debate against, I think it was Huckabee might have been there.
Sure.
Who else was there? I don't think Herman Cain was involved. Maybe he was. I don't know. That was many, many moons ago. Nonetheless, what the DNC is doing this time around, as opposed to what they did last time around, which was make it almost impossible for anyone to get into the debates, hence what we saw, they are doing 2 nights, double debate nights, and they are going to be choosing at random the people who will be participating in each debate. So it's going to be 2 full stages, 2 stages full of candidates, all on equal footing, no JV Team B squad whatsoever. So I think that's
It's a melee.
That's good. Well, yeah, sure, melee, whatever. But Andrew Yang will be in those debates, and he is the only Democratic candidate calling for a universal basic income, or what he calls the freedom dividend. And I know a lot of you might be saying, how the hell are we going to pay for that? But he actually has a really strong, intelligent plan, and he focuses on automation. He's talking about a lot of things other Democratic candidates aren't talking about. So worst case scenario, some of his ideas get picked up and rolled into the Democratic platform, and I think that would be absolutely wonderful. So I'm excited to speak with him a little bit later on in the show. Obviously, we have to talk about what happened in front of a congressional hearing. Of course, it was led by Elijah Cummings. This is regarding Michael Cohen, the former fixer, the former lawyer of Donald Trump. Worked for the dude for 10 years. things didn't work out as planned, and now he's looking at a 3-year stint in the penitentiary in the old pokey, and he wants to kind of, clear his mind a little bit.
Clear his conscience.
Clear his conscience a little bit. This is kind of, he's got Lanny Davis's lawyer out there. This is sort of the, yes, I made a mistake, but so did all these other people tour. And it was a really compelling testimony. So we're going to talk about that coming up here in a brief second. And we're also going to discuss what happened in Hanoi, Vietnam. I'm just happy that Donald Trump finally got to Vietnam. Do you remember Bone Spurs didn't stop him from this trip? However, this trip was about as ineffective as the actual war in Vietnam. It sort of ended in a stalemate. So we'll talk a little bit about what happened regarding Donald Trump meeting with Kim Jong-un for the second time.
Yeah.
And the big news was Kim Jong-un spoke with reporters. Can you believe it? But just real quickly, I do want to talk real small stories here, but just a couple of Democratic candidates, Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren, made a little news this week of things that kind of went under the radar because there were a lot bigger stories to cover in pretty much every sense of the word. But Elizabeth Warren, she has said she's not going to do or hold private fundraisers, and she's not going to do one-on-one meetings with big donors. I like this. She's putting her money where her mouth is and going kind of the Bernie Sanders route, wouldn't you say, Travis?
Sure.
Yeah, going with the small donors. And you know what it reminds me of? The Green Bay Packers. Why? Because they're owned by the fans, not by huge corporate overlords.
Is that so?
Every fan whoever is a shareholder in the Green Bay Packers, they don't have like a owner. The owners are the fans. So it will never be leaving the beautiful state of Wisconsin. The Green Bay Packers will always be there. And thank God, because if Wisconsin loses the Packers, oh my, all we have is really exceptional Bloody Marys with beer backers.
Yeah.
But then that's it. And then you don't have any game to watch on Sunday. Then you're just drinking alone at a bar on a Sunday without watching football. That's alcoholism. So Elizabeth Warren has said, I ain't going to talk to these private funders. I'm not going to do any private fundraisers. I ain't going to talk to these big donors one-on-one. And this is a quote from her. She says, that means no fancy receptions or big money fundraisers, only with people who can write big checks. She goes on to say, which I think is great. Again, that's how politics work. The big donors, they get all the favors, and for all intents and purposes, they literally write the policy. They literally write policy, and then members of Congress just sign the bill.
Yeah.
Sometimes they don't even know what the hell is in the dang thing. So she says, no fancy receptions or big money fundraisers, only with people who can write big checks. She says it means that wealthy donors won't be able to purchase better seats or one-on-one time with me at our events. And it means I won't be doing, quote, call time, which is when candidates take hours to call wealthy donors to ask for their support. And that is really half of the job. When I talk with Chaffetz over at, he was a politician, he's a Republican, Jason Chaffetz. But he was telling me, I was like, and he kind of resigned prematurely from Congress. I was like, why'd you do it? A lot of people were like, must be a scandal. I don't know any of this stuff. He just said he did it for family, and he said he did it because he cannot solicit money. Mm-hmm. He's like, I'm horrible at calling people. I hate being on the phone. I cannot ask for money. And some politicians are great at it. If you remember the documentary Wiener, of course, Anthony Weiner is now out of jail. He's back on the streets.
The Wiener popped out.
Wiener pops out. That was the New York Post headline because the New York Post is brilliant. But if you watch the documentary Wiener, you see him in full, let's get money mode.
He's so good at it.
So good at it. He's calling the biggest donors possible. Evidently, Huma had all of those connections. He cheated on her a bunch, or cyber cheated, I guess, a bunch. And he was still like, can I have all of your connections for the wealthiest donors? And you hear him on the phone talking to these people, and it makes your skin crawl.
Yeah.
Because you have to be so fake. I mean, they're more phony than someone working at a sex hotline. It's disgusting. So she says, I'm not doing it. No call time with these wealthy people. And hopefully that can that can leave her campaign. I want to say with less taint, but then that also sounds horrible to say. With a campaign with less taint sounds horrible. But, it can leave her campaign slightly less influenced by these large donors.
If you have a platform that's populist enough, you shouldn't have to call some CEO or whatever.
Especially
and Bernie
nowadays.
Sanders is a good example of that. He just sort of has a big enough platform and a populist enough platform.
Absolutely.
And he is doing it.
And nowadays, with the way the internet works and technology, it's so much easier. You just go to one of their websites. The first thing they ask is to donate, which is always a little bit annoying, especially now if you look at everyone's websites, they don't have their policies up yet. They're just like, give us cash.
Yeah.
And I'm like, who are you? Why would I want to give you cash? But I assure you, you can find the donate button.
Yeah.
It's pretty large. All right, so that's just a little bit of information coming out about Elizabeth Warren and her campaign. She's out there hitting the streets and seems to be resonating with a lot of people. Kamala Harris, of course, she's been on my been on my hypocrite list. Hypocrite list, of course, given her time as a prosecutor in Oakland. I thought she was a little bit too hawkish when it comes to, she's just incarcerating parents because their children are truant at school. And, of course, that's going to make the entire problem, go away. Or it could make it a lot worse. But she has now come out and said, and perhaps this is her, again, just kind of grabbing at straws, just trying to seem like she is a little bit more progressive than her record shows. Records are important, but, I suppose we have to try and take these words seriously, but of course, let's take them with a grain of salt. But Senator Kamala Harris, she has told supporters that she will decriminalize sex work nationwide, and I think this is a good thing. She goes on to say, she says, we can't criminalize consensual behavior as long as no one is being harmed. So this is one of those great sort of moments where libertarian tenets and the Democratic Party and liberals can get together and agree decriminalizing sex work is the way to go. This was during an interview with The Root. Harris was asked about sex work, and she says it ought to be decriminalized, though the interviewer did not specify at which level. I do, Harris responded. I think that we have to understand, though, that it is not as simple as that. There's an ecosystem around that involves crimes that harm people. And for those issues, I do not believe that anybody who hurts another human being or profits off of their exploitation should be free of criminal prosecution, she added. But when you're talking about consenting adults, yes, we should really consider that we can't criminalize consensual behavior as long as no one is being harmed. Of course, this is interesting because she supported the SESTA Act, which is the Stop Enabling Sex Traffickers Act. And of course, anyone with a brain would be like, how is that a bad thing? Well, what ended up happening was there's a thing called Backpages, and there's a lot of places where sex workers go to communicate, sort of message boards.
Yeah.
And they'll say, don't get with this guy. He's a total creep. This person is safe. They criminalized all of that. They did away with a full platform of communication for people who are engaging in illegal activities. So it has to be a little bit under the radar. But now they've pushed it so far underground once again, it's possible more people end up getting hurt. So this is also a case, and I like her description. I understand when it comes to human sex trafficking, as we saw with the Orchids of Asia, I believe that was the name of the Robert Kraft salon or spa that he was going to. The sex workers that were there weren't sex workers, they were sex slaves. These were people who were brought over from China under the false pretense of getting jobs, and then next thing you know, they're forced to touch Robert Kraft against, which is...
Who looks like Emperor Palpatine.
Yeah, it's a total friggin' nightmare. So that's totally different than what we're talking about here when it comes to consensual sex work.
Yeah, these
that
places,
is sex slavery and that is human trafficking. So she's right about the ecosystem that can go around, but I would argue the ecosystem is allowed to thrive because it's criminalized.
It helps. This is the kind of site that helps facilitate this kind of work, and otherwise it'll seep into the gutter. And it's like that Rate My Professor website.
Oh yeah,
like
Rate My Professor.
Sometimes you need to know if your teacher is going to be hot or not. And that kind of website.
Is that what that was about?
Yeah, with the number of like hot peppers next to the teacher's name.
I never saw
I
it.
always looked up to see if my college professor was going to be hot or not. And,
Really?
And in a way, it was sort of a back page for me.
Interesting. I thought that was more like, do they teach you good?
No, it was mostly to see if it was a hot professor.
Okay, so that was one of the things that she supported, SESTA, which advocates shutting down platforms like Backpage. According to Harris, she also told The Root, I was advocating 15 years ago that we have to stop arresting these prostitutes and start going after the Johns and the pimps because we were criminalizing the women, which is absolutely true. She goes on to say Backpage was providing advertisements for the sale of children of minors. She added, responding to the criticism of the shuttering of Backpage.com, and so I called for them to be shut down, and I have no regrets about that. So that is why I say take it with a grain of salt, because I'm not sure if she does fully understand what that does. Of course, she's a prosecutor. She understands these issues, but I'm not sure if she understands the issues from the working person perspective necessarily. From the criminal justice perspective, obviously she gets it. But what does it look like on a day-to-day basis for people who are in the industry? I think she might be missing a little bit of an understanding on that.
RoboCop only knew justice. He didn't really...
He did.
He was too much of a robot to experience human emotions until the very end of the movie. But Kamala Harris is a RoboCop.
She is in her own right. So those are just a couple of smaller stories that went under the radar this week that I thought were relatively interesting. All right. So let's go on and talk a little bit about what happened when it comes to Michael Cohen talking in front of this panel here. So some of the interesting things, obviously the great race debate, which was absolutely hilarious, which we'll talk about briefly. But there were some interesting things regarding Michael Cohen. And of course, the left, this is another one of those things where the left is like, this guy is telling the truth, nothing but the truth, 100% truth. And the right is like, there's nothing he says that's accurate, all this kind of stuff. Obviously, Michael Cohen, his back is against the wall. He's speaking with the Southern District of New York on a regular basis. It seems like it's almost daily. He said continually. And, of course, that's the real story in many ways, what's happening with the Southern District of New York, because that's going to impact the Trump Foundation, which is a total scam, which is, of course, ironic because, I mean, the Clinton Foundation is another scam, but Trump's big thing was how the Clintons are these scam artists, all this stuff. And the Trump Foundation is absolutely horrible. We're going to tell a funny little tale about that Michael Cohen brought up during testimony here in a second. And Trump business. What's going on with the Trump business? Southern District of New York, they're sniffing around. And if they want to find something, even if you aren't purposely doing anything illegal, in Donald Trump's case, I don't think it would be not on purpose. But honestly, if federal prosecutors or if prosecutors want to find something, they will find something.
Yes.
Everyone has made mistakes on their taxes. I'm sure of it. So, and Donald Trump has done a lot of these things on purpose. So I'm sure they're digging up some interesting things. But this was an interesting point that I thought Michael Cohen made. He says everybody's job at the Trump organization was to protect Mr. Trump. He said every day, most of us knew we were coming in and we were going to lie for him on something. And that has become the norm. That's exactly what's happening right now in this country. It's exactly what's happening right here in government. And I thought that was fascinating because you see a lot of these Republicans right now, specifically Jim Jordan, Mark Meadows is another one, a lot of the Freedom Caucus. Mark Meadows, of course, the head of the Freedom Caucus, bending over backwards, just being Neo from the Matrix, just attempting to dodge all of these bullets and pretending that they're not real. When push comes to shove, they're all going to be Michael Cohen's in their own right. And that's what he was saying. He's like, I did it for 10 years. I lied to protect this dude. I did everything that he asked me to do, and this is where it got me. 3 years in the penitentiary. So I thought that was a really powerful moment, and I thought that was something that I didn't really watch too much of the news coverage because I don't know what they're talking about half the time, because it's madness. But I thought that was really a powerful thing because you can see the Republican Party going down that road, and they have for a long time. Even Lindsey Graham now. Lindsey Graham is just so in bed with Donald Trump. It is disturbing, specifically given the fact that Lindsey Graham was best friends with John McCain, and we know it. And Donald Trump continues to mock the legacy of John McCain, a man who actually went to Vietnam, stayed there when he wanted to leave. Of course, Donald Trump wanted to leave, and he just got right out of there. So I think it's going to be fascinating. Once this era is done, it'll be interesting to see. And I'm not going to forget. I can forgive, but I will never forget the Republican politicians who are going to bat.
But that's
for
the
this
thing.
guy,
Like they can just scatter. Like with Michael Cohen, it's one person. The GOP, it's just a bunch. I mean, it's going on your going on your Matrix analogy. They're all Mr. Smith, like the clones of Mr. Smith.
They are.
It doesn't matter if they like go to bat for Trump because they can just sort of hide amongst the masses of white dude faces that did do that.
Mark my words. They will have primary competition. They will have competition in their primaries once the dust settles. And I thought Elijah Cummings did a great job in this hearing of just trying to remind people that what we're in right now is abnormal.
Yeah.
And he's like, we got to get back to normalcy. He's even talking about Mark Meadows. There was during the great race debate with the woman out of Michigan, Congresswoman out of Michigan, Tlaib, talking. We'll talk about that in a second. But Elijah Cummings really did the best that he could to be like, this isn't normal. We need to get back to a place where we can agree to disagree and understand that we have more in common than we don't. And so I think he did a good job. But I'm sure that a lot of these politicians are going to never say the name Donald Trump out loud again when all of this is said and done.
But this is and Cummings knew from the beginning, he was like trying to get ahead of the fact that all the Republicans are going to call Cohen a liar. But
Yes.
this is so clearly like cleaved on partisan lines.
Well,
like the Republicans are not going to budge from the Cohen is a snake, liar,
but of
rat.
course, the irony is that the reason that he is a liar, individual one,
who is that?
Donald Trump.
Oh, okay.
So the whole thing is still predicated on Donald Trump, and they were pretty pathetic. I mean, I understand this guy isn't a perfect witness. The dude's looking at 3 years in the penitentiary. If you're a prosecutor or a defense team, you're not like, this is the perfect witness. No one cannot trust this guy who already lied to the same committee before. But it is what it is. So Cohen, he also provided the committee with documentation to support his claim that Trump broke the law. And of course, this is regarding the Stormy Daniel payments of $130,000. These were hush payments that happened during the campaign. Could be construed as a campaign finance violation. The argument against that is pretty hilarious. The argument against that is that he does this so much, and it just so happened to...
they overlapped.
It just overlapped with the presidential campaign. But when Donald Trump was in office, Michael Cohen presented a check for $35,000, and this was from August 1st, 2017. Trump's signature on the check strongly suggests he was aware of the payoff and the payback in addition to the campaign finance violation. Trump may have broken the law by not listing the money exchange in sworn financial disclosure forms in 2017. And of course, they showed the check in the courtroom. They got the little TV in there. The Republicans also showed a small picture of Michael Cohen with the words liar, liar, pants on fire underneath it. I mean, really remarkably juvenile stuff, but that's the world we live in. The check, you can't argue with it, $35K. Obviously signed by Donald Trump. So I thought that was really interesting, actual evidence that Donald Trump knew of the payment. And of course, I've been saying this forever. Either Donald Trump is the worst businessman in the history of the world and doesn't know where $130,000 was going to his lawyer, or he was in on it. So, of course he was in on it. If you know anything, my understanding of how the Trump world works, it ends with Trump.
Yeah.
He was real hands-on. He wasn't a dude who was like, well, we better not run this by Donald. It's like you run by everything by Donald Trump. So the whole idea that there would be $130K going to his lawyer unbeknownst to Donald Trump to pay off this woman, Stormy Daniels, is and was and continues to be totally and utterly ludicrous. So in addition to that, Cohen provided the committee with financial statements he said Trump gave to Deutsche Bank. Now, this is what Donald Trump, he's just, there's a great documentary, The Trump Dynasty. I think it's on A&E, talking about how Donald Trump's businesses, they all failed. Mm-hmm. The Taj Mahal, how did Donald Trump get out of the failing Taj Mahal? He went public. So basically what he did was, he's like, this is totally failing. He kept up the lie in public and was like, everything is great, it's grand, it's wonderful, it's beautiful, it's gorgeous. And he knew they were hemorrhaging money. There was another recession that hit. No one was going to AC to gamble because no one had any freaking money. So he's like, let's go public. So he took the company public. Now everyone else is invested. So the stock started at $35 a share, went all the way down to 17 cents. Donald Trump now is out, and he was able, so basically the everyday people got stuck carrying his debt of the Taj Mahal. Donald Trump gets out. Every business venture he had that failed, he still managed to make money because he would just do these kinds of things. And some of the things that he would do was he would inflate his own net worth in an illegal effort to make it easily to obtain bank loans. So he's like, I got all this money. I got $10 billion. Give me a loan. Give me a loan. And then the inverse of that, he would deflate the value of his assets to reduce his taxes. So he's telling the banks, I got all the money. I got the money I got the money of the gods. I got everything I possibly need. Gold toilets. I drink Evian. That's how fancy he is. He's drinking Evian. Mm-hmm. So he tells them all of that. Meanwhile, he's telling the government, I got nothing. I'm just a poor boy eating soup all day, and the soup has rocks in it. And it turns out, obviously, neither of those are true. So that's just the kind of mind that we're talking about when we talk about Donald Trump. Nothing is on the level. Nothing is true.
No.
It is all based on a complete and utter lie. His entire existence is a farce. And it's so sad that farce is now the most powerful man in this country and possibly without a doubt, in the world. So Michael Cohen continued to talk about what does it look like when Donald Trump tells you to lie. He says he doesn't tell you to lie. He makes strong suggestions of things that he likes. Now, of course, Michael Cohen could always say, Michael used the analogy. He's like, if Donald Trump, for example, says, you're wearing a beautiful tie, that's the best tie I've ever seen. And then he asked me, what do you think about that tie? I'm going to say, well, it's a beautiful tie. It's the best tie I've ever seen. Mm-hmm. And that's just sort of how it all cult-like, way cult-like, where obviously Michael Cohen, you're watching this from an outsider, you're like, you have free will. You could be like, no, I've seen a better tie. But then you got to think about, this is your boss, and this is someone you want to impress. You are the man who said you would take a bullet for Donald Trump. Yeah, you like the tie.
It's coded language like a mob boss would use.
Exactly. So Cohen said the president and his associates have lied repeatedly about how long the discussions, not just lying about financial stuff. This is where some of the lie, or somebody's tie, this is where the lies become significant to what we're dealing with now. And this is regarding the Trump Tower that was supposed to be built in Moscow. So Donald Trump, now we're wondering, why the hell is he so up Putin's you-know-what? So Cohen said the president and his associates have lied repeatedly about how long discussions about a scuttled Trump Tower development in Moscow went on and who exactly was involved in the negotiations. According to Michael Cohen, the president checked in several times during the 2016 campaign and would ask, how's it going in Russia? And as late as June of 2016, this is well into, the election. Of course, he announced in 2015, in July, I believe. So this is well into the presidential campaign. He was asking what's going on with Russia. Now, Donald Trump said that he completed all of those discussions by January of 2016. Another one of these classic Trump manipulations and lies. And I firmly believe that Donald Trump was probably still talking about Trump Tower in Moscow. At this point, we're talking June 2016. We're in the middle of, we got some fun debates happening. Everything is kind of going crazy. I don't think that Donald Trump thinks he's going to be president. Maybe he really does want it. Who the hell knows? But nonetheless, June of 2016, still being concerned about Trump Tower, that does make everybody feel unnerved because we just don't want our president to have foreign interests. We want our president to be backing us 100% in everything that he does.
Yeah.
Because that is the one role of what a president's supposed to do. A big role, anyway. Robinhood is an investing app that lets you buy and sell stocks, ETFs, options, and cryptos all commission-free. While other brokerages charge up to $10 for every trade, Robinhood doesn't charge any commission fees, so you can trade stocks and keep all of your profits. Plus, there is no account minimum deposit needed to get started, so you can start investing at any level. The simple, intuitive design of Robinhood makes investing easy for newcomers and experts alike. View easy-to-understand charts and market data, and place a trade in just 4 taps on your smartphone. You can also view stock collections, such as 100 most popular. With Robinhood, you can learn how to invest in the market as you build your portfolio. Discover new stocks, track your favorite companies, and get custom notifications for price movements so you never miss the right moment to invest. Robinhood is giving listeners of Abe Lincoln's Top Hat a free stock like Apple, Ford, or Sprint to help you build your portfolio. Sign up at tophat.robinhood.com. Cohen also testified about Donald Trump's longtime confidant, of course, the one and only Roger Stone, who we haven't heard from. He's been good. He's been quiet this week.
I think he learned his lesson a little bit.
Maybe he did. Of course, Roger Stone getting in trouble with the judge after he posted a picture of her with crosshairs next to her head and, just kind of roasted her. Not a good idea. We talked about that last week.
I think he probably popped a ball gag in his mouth and is just trying to chill out in the meantime.
Yeah, honestly, he might have popped a ball gag into his mouth, and that's fine. That's fine. That's a sign of Roger Stone I like.
And that's safe, and that's consensual.
That's
great.
And
that's
he and
nice,
his wife,
and it's healthy.
He and his wife, I don't know. Yeah, sure. Why not? You know what? Why not? It's healthy. That's what I say. Cohen also testified again that the longtime confidant Roger Stone was in contact with WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange during the 2016 campaign. Cohen said he specifically overheard a July 2016 phone call in which Stone told Trump that he had just gotten off the phone with Assange. So literally Roger Stone is talking to Trump, be like, just got off the phone with Assange, and that's where he told him that this massive email dump was about to come out against Hillary Clinton or the DNC, and Donald Trump said, that's great. That's great
said,
news.
Wouldn't
that be great?
That's how I know it's real, because it just sounds so Trump. Like, wouldn't that be great?
Wouldn't that be great if that was able to happen?
Amazing.
And of course, a few days later, WikiLeaks released thousands of emails that were stolen from the DNC. And one of the areas, which is hilarious to me, some people are trying to argue that even if Roger Stone told Donald Trump that WikiLeaks was going to make this dump, they're like, well, he didn't even get the information right, because Donald Trump was told that they were going to dump Hillary's emails, and they dumped the DNC. So, but of course we know the DNC and Hillary were quite close together, as of course the Clintons bailed them out, which is probably why we didn't have the fairest Democratic election in 2016. In yet another stunning twist, Cohen testified Trump likely knew of the infamous June 26th Trump Tower meeting with his son Donald Jr. as well. So these are kind of the biggest issues when it comes to Moscow. Now, there are also, as always, some of the flimsier things that Michael Cohen talked about, because they're a little bit left to your imagination. The story about Donald Trump hearing about the Trump Tower meeting with the Russians. Evidently, Cohen's in a meeting with Donald Trump. Donnie Jr. walks in. Maybe he's in a Snickers bar. Maybe he's having a couple of Twix. I have no idea what the kid eats. And he goes behind the desk. And Michael Cohen is like, that was very strange because no one goes behind Donald Trump's desk. I mean, you can imagine the guy's probably not wearing pants or something. And
he's eating a hot dog like a hamburger.
Of course. Yeah. Well, he's crazy. I mean, no denying that. And he tells Donald Trump in his ear, this is Donald Trump Jr. talking to Donald Trump as Michael Cohen sits across the desk. So Donald Trump Jr. leans over and says, the meeting is all set. And then Donald Trump says, okay, good. Let me know. So there is speculation by Cohen that was in reference to the aforementioned Trump Tower meeting. So those were a couple of the big things that we learned coming from Michael Cohen. And, of course, we also, as I mentioned before, had some funnier stuff just to show you what kind of personality Donald Trump is. So one of the things we talked about as well was this whole friggin' auction thing. This is, like, totally ludicrous. Okay, so Donald Trump, he's got a portrait of himself, and it's called the Donald, cleverly called the Donald. So it's up for auction in East Hampton. According to Michael Cohen, this pharmaceutical dude, Stuart Rahr, plunked down the money for artist William Quigley's painting of his friend and landlord at the time, Donald Trump. Trump later paid back Rahr using Trump Foundation money. Again, we've talked about this on the past before, but that doesn't seem to be a Trump Foundation. Like, what greater good than buying a painting of yourself that you put up for auction using the Trump Foundation money? So sources say the painting sold for $60,000 at the time. Cohen confirmed that number during his testimony. 3 days following the event, Trump tweeted, just found out that at a charity auction of celebrity portraits in East Hampton, my portrait by artist William Quigley topped list at $60K. He bought it himself so he could have the most expensive portrait purchased at this auction. That just shows you the psychopathy, the sociopathy, and the manipulation and length that Donald Trump is willing to go to make himself seem bigger than he is. He must be insecure. I don't know what the hell is going on.
Well, this is just like in 2017, he posed as his own publicist.
Yes, of course.
To tell a story about how Carla Bruni, the model, dumped Mick Jagger to go out with Trump.
I know. At least he was working. At least he did it. I know a lot of comedians who fake to be their own publicist as well, but
that's
just trying to get road gigs.
That's part of the job.
That's part of the job. But of course, I mean, that's just who he is. So anyway, a couple of interesting things coming from the Cohen testimony. You can't deny the check. You can't deny the paper trail. So the next big guy they have to get in this committee. By the way, Elijah Cummings, they are doing more than just, going after Donald Trump. And Elijah Cummings made that a point. They had an opioid conversation. They had an opioid hearing. That's a major epidemic. They met with pharmaceutical industries. I watched that on C-SPAN. That was really compelling, a little bit boring, but super interesting. And they also had a conversation about voting rights. They had a whole hearing on voting rights in this same committee. So this is not the first thing that this committee is doing. But what this committee needs to do is follow up on Alan Weisselberg. This is the dude who knows Donald Trump's financial secrets and has agreed to become a cooperating witness. Now, Alan Weisselberg, he has been with the Trump family for around 40 years. He worked with his pops first, and then obviously Donald Trump. And he knows all of the finances. He's seen all of the taxes. He knows the manipulation. He knows the tactics that they've used, the inflating, the deflating of numbers, whatever it might be. They need to call him. They need to call him, get him under oath, and just hear what he has to say, because it seems to me he is the one who knows where the proverbial bodies are being placed or buried, and I think he would be fascinated.
Well, he has been granted immunity, so that probably will happen.
I think it's going to happen. And speaking of where the bodies are buried, what is the one name of the goon? Because Michael Cohen also said you got a bunch of goons.
Matthew Calamari.
Matthew Calamari. That's one of Trump's goons.
Mamma mia.
And he might literally know where bodies are buried. I don't know. Honestly, who the hell knows? Donald Trump was in the construction business for a long time. You deal with a lot of mobsters and a lot of union heads, a lot of corruption. So there might be a body under the Taj Mahal. I have no idea. But nonetheless, Calamari, Michael Calamari, and Alan Weisselberg. More Alan Weisselberg, of course. Calamari is as his name would suggests kind of a meathead. Okay, so that would be fascinating to hear from Alan Weisselberg, and hopefully we can. All right, just lastly regarding this hearing, we talked about the blow-up regarding Representative Mark Meadows and what happened here. So Donald Trump, he was called racist, he was called a con man, called a liar by Michael Cohen. And in order to say that Donald Trump isn't racist, Mark Meadows went to the cameras, and behind him was a gal named Lynn Patton. Now, she is the HUD regional administrator. Her name is Lynn Patton. During the congressional testimony from former Trump fixer Michael Cohen, Patton, a black woman, appeared at the invitation of the Republican congressman to refute Cohen's claims that Trump is a racist. So Mark Cohen is talking to the cameras, really just a bizarre photo op. And he's talking about how Donald Trump isn't racist because, look, he hired this black chick, Lynn Patton, and she didn't even speak. She didn't talk. It was so
literally a prop.
Well, now that's the line we're going to go to here. So that's what happened. So this is according to Meadows. He said, quote, "You made some very demeaning comments about the president that Miss Patton doesn't agree with." He says, in fact, of course, referring to his racism, he says, in fact, it has nothing to do with your claim of racism. She says that as a daughter of a man born in Birmingham, Alabama, that there is no way that she would work for an individual who was racist. How do you reconcile the two of those? Okay.
They pulled off what did they pull, like a sheet off of this woman?
There she is.
How do you explain
proof.
this?
So, it was just, anyway, I want to say this from this perspective. Lynn Patton, she knew what she was doing, and she is a fully functioning person, and so I don't think, so she did this on her own.
Yeah.
And I'm sure she likes working for Donald Trump. I'm sure that she's just fine with her job and her position, and more power to her. But this did strike some people, specifically, well, it's struck a lot of people as like, that's a little, it seems like a little reaching.
Yeah.
So there were multiple Democratic representatives that kind of made critical comments about what happened there with Meadows and Patton, being like, that seemed a little theatrical, a little bit over the top. But the one who went in the most was Representative out of Michigan, Rashida Tlaib, who called out Meadows this way. This is what she said. She said, "The fact that someone would use a prop, a black woman, in this chamber, in this committee, is alone racist in itself." Meadows then interrupted to ask Tlaib's word be taken down, a procedure by which a member can be rebuked for a personal insult to another member. "If anyone knows my record," this is according to Meadows, and he's talking to Chairman Elijah Cummings. He says, "If anyone knows my record as it relates, it should be you, Mr. Chairman," which then led to us finding out that Elijah Cummings and Mark Meadows are best friends.
Yes.
They are, and they're very close. And honestly, Elijah Cummings handled this whole bizarre scenario well. Tlaib then reiterated that as her words had made clear, she was referring not to the contents of Meadows' heart, but to the decision to parade Patton in front of the committee. So this whole thing lasted I want to say 5 full minutes, maybe even longer. And Michael Cohen is just sitting there what the hell is going on?
Exactly.
Why are you guys aren't I the golden child? Can I not get any respect over here? This is my hearing, isn't it? So they're going back and forth bickering, and I understand again so then Meadows is like, that it's racist for you to say that that's racist, and then Tlaib is like, I think it's racist that you just bring some black woman out and be like, see, Donald Trump's not racist. The whole thing was convoluted and a little bit juvenile in its own right, but it was quite humorous in many ways as well. Mark Meadows almost cried out of nowhere. He's like, I've got black grandchildren, and I'm like, I don't know. I really don't know how this got to where we are now.
My dad used to like loudly proclaim that his favorite movie was Life, the Eddie Murphy movie.
Of course.
And this is just like that.
And it does happen, of course. That's what Jordan Peele did in Get Out. That's why that movie was so powerful, was the two liberal elites, quote unquote liberal elites, being like, I would have voted for Obama a third time. So many people, I mean, believed that kind of resolved them or absolved them of all of whatever racial views they might have.
Book.
Yeah, I love the Green Book. It won. The Green Book won.
Great. I'm so happy for those white old men.
Spike Lee was hilarious after he lost, and I haven't seen Black Klansman. I heard it was okay. I don't know. But he's like, I always lose to people who drive other people in cars.
Yeah.
Because I think he also lost to Driving Miss Daisy.
That's right.
So that's the curse. That's the curse of being Spike Lee. But nonetheless, so that little dispute happened, and everyone's like, okay, whatever. But I do think that the Congresswoman, I understand where she's coming from. Because I'm like, what is happening? It's very bizarre. And so that was just some more of the extracurricular, I suppose, theater of the event that occurred.
You just didn't need to defend Trump on the racist thing, though. Like that's part of his appeal to his base. Like you could have just not gone there, I guess.
It's a sensitive issue. It's a sensitive issue for a lot of people, specifically Republicans, and I know this because I go to Fox News on a regular basis. Some are just like, you can call me racist. I don't care because either I am or I feel like I'm not, whatever. But then others, it's like he almost cried.
Yeah.
Like immediately, this man was almost in tears. And so, it is what it is. It was kind of a sideshow more than anything. But I'm not, Lynn Patton, she made her own decision. I'm not saying that so calling her a prop, I also think is a little bit demeaning. But then that's why these things are so difficult to let you. We're not solving this in a congressional hearing about Michael Cohen. That's all I know. I think Mark Meadows didn't need to do that. Or if Lynn Patton wanted to talk, she should have spoke. She could have also just gone to the cameras and been like, I got something to say. The whole thing of him talking for her.
She has autonomy. She should have,
I don't know. The whole thing was just so freaking weird and confusing. I'm like, why are we here again? What happened? Anyway, so that's just a little bit of a synopsis on what happened with Michael Cohen. And he won't be back, I don't think. I think he's done testifying now. Again, we're waiting to see if we can't get even a bigger fish in some ways, Alan Weselberg. That would be huge and must-see
truly
TV.
A big fish would be Matthew Calamari.
Of course, the Calamari.
The Calamari part.
I know what's going on. I'm hip with the world. He'll break your kneecaps. That's good. Calamari's revenge. I actually don't eat calamari anymore.
Well, it's a lot of times it's pig anus.
No.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah, a lot of the cheaper calamari is actually fried pig anus.
Really? Honestly?
Mm-hmm.
That's not the reason I don't eat it is because I don't like eating calamari, but pig anus, that's hot dogs and hamburgers and God knows what else. Okay. All right. Well, there you go. That's a bit on Michael Cohen. Again, just momentarily here, we're going to interview Andrew Yang, so be sure you stick around for that. Just lastly, talk about what happened in Hanoi, Vietnam. Donald Trump is out there. My God, I did end up watching Sean Hannity just because I have to do that sometimes. And the way that they doused praise on Donald Trump for meeting with Kim Jong-un is just so ridiculous and hilarious. So after the first meeting, they agreed to agree to talk again. And this was the second time they were discussing denuclearization of North Korea. Now, of course, this is kind of the only thing that North Korea has is their nukes, really, or the potential of said nukes in order to thwart off any perhaps invaders. But the theory here is that South Korea is actively working to unite the Koreas. South Korea has a whole bunch of reunification groups. In the government, they have reunification committees, organizations. I think they would like to see reunification. But who doesn't want to see reunification is the Chinese. Now, Xi Jinping, their economy is in shambles. Xi Jinping is getting hit by all sides right now. From all political factions. He's not doing great. Obviously, he's still technically going to be leader for life, but politically, it's getting a little bit harder for him right now in China. And the last thing they want is to have North Korea, of course, the buffer from the West, basically, in South Korea, right on their doorstep. They don't want a Korean power. And then, of course, you also have all the technology, all the minerals, all the oils. There's so many things that South Korea and Korea in general could provide. They would be a viable nation. Mm-hmm. And China just does not want that. So I wouldn't be surprised if in the back rooms when Kim Jong-un is talking with China, and of course China and Russia, those are the only two countries that give North Korea anything. They're the only countries trading with North Korea, the only countries keeping North Korea afloat at all. So whatever the Chinese want, that's what the Chinese are going to get regarding North Korea. And I just do not see reunification happening anytime soon. Certainly, as long as the Chinese are as opposed to it as they are now, there is just no way in hell, because they don't want a strong Korea on their border, because they know that's going to be much more of a Western nation, because North Korea has nothing without China. And if Korea is together as a nation again, South Korea, it's basically going to be what happened with the southern states after the Civil War. Mm-hmm. We're just going to have to rebuild. South Korea will rebuild North Korea. So they know exactly what that means. The United States is going to be allies with Korea. And not the Chinese necessarily, or not nearly as strong as allies as the Chinese are currently with the North Koreans. So what happened in the summit was exactly nothing. Nothing happened whatsoever. And I have heard, as a matter of fact, the summit ended 2 days before it was supposed to end. Donald Trump got up and left the meetings or whatever. And a lot of people have said that this reminds them of what Ronald Reagan did in 1986 during the Reykjavik summit. Now, of course, it's not what Ronald Reagan did. It's much more juvenile and much, much dumber than that. But Reagan had met with Gorbachev, and they were trying to figure out some, denuclearization strategy. But there was one point of contention. Reagan was committed to see his Strategic Defense Initiative, that's known as SDI, to completion. Gorbachev, fearing an imbalance of power, was equally determined to make sure the SDI would not be implemented. Reagan offered assurances to Gorbachev that the missile defense shield, which had been championed and funded despite widespread criticism at home, was being developed not to gain an advantage, but to offer safety against accidents or outlaw nations. But because Ronald Reagan refused to bend on the SDI, and of course Gorbachev refused to end on the Strategic Defense Initiative as well, he walked away from the meeting. But before that, they had agreed on a series of different things regarding denuclearization, proliferation, significant things, and Ronald Reagan chose to walk away. So you hear the people on the right will be like, Donald Trump is just like Ronald Reagan. Mm-hmm. And there is a stark difference between the two scenarios. There is nothing. At least Ronald Reagan was an actor. Donald Trump was a reality show guy. That's just that should just show you where we're at now. So basically, nothing happened in Hanoi. Kim Jong-un spoke with some reporters, and I don't think anything got worse, but I don't think Mike Pompeo, of course, Secretary of State there, was extremely happy. Turns out, as people have been saying for a long time, you can't just go into these meetings spitting from the hip. Usually what happens is the aides, Secretary of State, whatever their counterpart version of Secretary of State is, Defense Secretary, usually these people have laid out a solid groundwork that then the leaders kind of come in after already agreeing on 95, 98% of the basics, go in, maybe have some personal negotiation with whatever it might be, and sign the deal that is basically already written. But that's not the way that Donald Trump does it, because he is, it's interesting. I was thinking about, you ever meet people who are like, I know everything, I'm so smart, or like, oh, that's just, and it's like, by definition, that person is extremely stupid, because you have to be kind of smart to realize, I don't know, the vast majority of things, even if you know, a bunch of stuff about a lot of things, we still know nothing individually.
Yeah, I prefer.
It's impossible.
I prefer stupid people who have a lot of self-awareness.
Stupid people who have self-awareness who then want to learn stuff.
Yeah.
Because then they're not stupid people. It's always the people who are like, I already know, I'm such a like a lot of these alpha males. And then you actually talk to them, I'm like, oh no, you're a moron.
That is
I see, because you already think you know everything.
That is like the new archetype, like the Jordan Peterson, the Ben Shapiro. Like there is like alpha know-it-all is like a philosophy people are following now. But it's insufferable and obnoxious, and
because you just simply don't. And Donald Trump thinks he knows it all because he's too ignorant to understand he knows nothing or very little, and so naturally that plays into some of the reasons why the talks didn't go anywhere. I don't want to say they failed, they just didn't go anywhere. It was a big publicity stunt, without a doubt benefits Kim Jong-un more, being seen on a national stage, being embraced by world leaders, talking to the press, making himself seem more open. So we have to remember Kim Jong-un is a complete and utter maniac. He's a total monster. Just some of the things he's done. We're going to talk about his uncle here in a second. How did he kill him? Well, it wasn't very fun. But this is according to a North Korean defector. He claims that he witnessed in 2013 two men closely linked to Kim Jong-un's uncle, Jang So-taek. They faced a firing squad of 8 anti-aircraft guns. The two men allegedly had lumps of iron stuffed into their mouth because Kim had just not trusted them, and Kim's uncle Jang was forced to watch the murder of his colleagues. According to the defector, blood was pouring down on his face before he fainted. The uncle was then executed himself later that year with an anti-aircraft gun, according to multiple reports. Kang also claimed a top police official, also close to the North Korean leader's uncle, was killed with a flamethrower. So things are heating up in North Korea. The police official was burned alive because Kim personally hated him. Kang claimed another official and his wife were stripped naked and mauled to death by a pack of dogs. So that is some detail coming in. That was from February 25th of this year. It's just disgusting. Even if 3/4 of those things are right, it's disgusting. But I also think there's not a lot to do in North Korea.
That's what I was going to say. I think there's a lot of that is cruel and evil. I think a big part of it is boredom.
Boredom in theater.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Kim Jong-un, this is the kind of guy he is. So you see his little goofy fat face and you're like, he looks like a cherub. I want to poke him and punch him and squeeze his little fat face.
This is what happens when the Detective Pikachu trailer comes out and you can't watch it.
You can't watch it. Well, maybe they got it in North Korea first. I don't know. But that's it. So just don't lose sight of the fact that Kim Jong-un is a criminal. The man is a total tyrant. And when Donald Trump goes over there and kisses his ass, calls him a great guy, says he's a great leader, because Donald Trump just is so ridiculous, we have to remember the people who are suffering in concentration camps as we speak and as you listen to this. So I guess no matter how bad your day is going, you're doing better than people in work camps.
There are a lot of concentration camps in the world.
So many. No, slavery is still alive and concentration camps are still prevalent. Absolutely. So that's Kim Jong-un. Again, just don't forget it. Rocket launchers, flamethrowers, a bunch of rabid dogs, whatever it takes. He'll kill people and be happy to do so. All right, so I guess that's basically it. I would like to. I feel like I should say more on Hanoi, but literally nothing happened.
Yeah.
So I don't know what else to say.
The price is wrong, bitch. That's what happened.
No one really has time to go to the post office. You're busy. Who's got the time for all that traffic, parking, lugging all your mail and packages? It's a real hassle. That's why you need Stamps.com, one of the most popular time-saving tools for small businesses. Stamps.com eliminates trips to the post office and saves you money with discounts that you can't even get at the post office. Stamps.com brings all the amazing services of the U.S. Postal Service right to your computer. Whether you're a small office sending invoices, an online seller shipping out products, or even a warehouse sending out thousands of packages a day, Stamps.com can handle it all with ease. Simply use your computer to print official U.S. postage 24/7 for any letter, any package, any class of mail, anywhere you want to send. Once your mail is ready, just hand it to your mail carrier or drop it in a mailbox. It's that simple. With Stamps.com, you get 5 cents off every first-class stamp and up to 40% off priority mail. Not to mention, it's a fraction of the cost of those expensive postage meters. Stamps.com is a no-brainer, saving you time and money. It's no wonder over 700,000 small businesses already use Stamps.com. And one of those 700,000 small businesses is the Last Podcast Network. Stamps.com is a no-brainer, and they help us get you your shirts, stickers, and doggy bandanas each and every week. Right now, my listeners get a special offer that includes a 4-week trial plus free postage and a digital scale without any long-term commitment. Just go to Stamps.com, click on the microphone at the top of the homepage, and type in Top Hat. That's Stamps.com. Enter Top Hat. All right, folks, I am honored to have with me right now. He is the founder of Venture for America, the VFA. He is a 2020 Democratic presidential candidate. He also was selected by the Obama administration in 2012 as a champion of change, and in 2015 as a presidential ambassador of global entrepreneurship. Andrew Yang is with me. Thank you so much for being on the show, man.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you are the only candidate running within the Democratic Party that is publicly advocating for a universal basic income, and I like what you call it, a freedom dividend. Can you explain a little bit about what that means? How would that take effect? I know you mentioned how the Roosevelt Institute has said that that a UBI would grow the economy by over $2 trillion and annually create 4.5 million jobs. Now, how would that do that?
Well, the great thing is anyone listening to this can just think about what you would do with $1,000 a month. And most people would spend that money locally in their communities on things like car repairs they've been putting off, and food and tutoring for their kids, and the occasional night out. And that money just goes right into the Main Street economy. Right. And all of those establishments then have to hire more people. The economy is busier. And that's how the Roosevelt Institute arrived at those projections that it would create millions of jobs and grow the consumer economy by more than 10%.
So now, obviously, the big question that everyone is going to have, you want to give $1,000 a month. Now, is that for families or is that per person?
That's per adult. So if there's a household with 2 adults, that household would get $24,000 a year.
Okay, great. And of course, $12,000, that's just beneath the poverty line. But that, of course, is coming for free from the government. Now, of course, the question is, how does this work as far as pay? I know that you've proposed something that's called a value-added tax that would then sort of pay for this freedom dividend. Can you explain a little bit what the value-added tax is and how it would come, or how would it manifest itself in reality? What would it look like?
Sure. So I like to use Amazon as the most prominent example, where you probably saw the headlines that Amazon reported zero in federal tax liability last year, despite record profits of over $11 billion. And Jeff Bezos has a similar situation where he has over $100 billion in Amazon stock, but there's been no taxable event. So the issue you have to ask yourself as a society is, how are we going to get through this era of 30% of malls closing and trucks driving themselves if the biggest winners, like your Amazons and Apples and Googles and Facebooks, don't have to pay any taxes?
Right.
So what you do is you look around the world and you find that every other advanced economy has adopted a value-added tax that is very, very difficult to game. So after I'm president, we pass the value-added tax, and then the American people get a slice of every Amazon sale, every Google search, every Facebook ad, every robot truck mile. A value-added tax essentially is not a point of sale or consumption of goods, but at every part of the supply chain. Right. So the reason why other countries have already adopted it is that it's very, very hard for the Amazons and Googles and Facebooks of the world to game their way out of.
So it's interesting, and I want to get to I want to talk about small businesses with you and what gets you so excited about entrepreneurship and things like that here in a second. But when it comes to the value-added tax, is it similar to what is going on in Germany, for example, where they tax corporations that have robots that were previously positions held by humans as if those robots were people? Is it sort of like that where you would tax, because the automation, and you are the only one who is really nailing this. It's not immigrants. It is automation. That is what is crushing us. So what does that look like in real life? Is it a taxation on automation?
It really is. And so what Germany's done with robots, I was looking into whether we could do here. But in our society, it's actually very hard to determine even what is a robot. Like if CVS decides to replace a cashier with an iPad, are we going to tax them on that? If you replace 1,000 call center workers with artificial intelligence, do you have some sort of tax on a per former employee basis? It's very, very hard to measure and administer.
Right.
So a value-added tax simplifies it and makes it so that just for value-changing hands, which it would in each of these examples, then the American people get a slice.
Interesting. And what do you say to some of the critics who would say something, I love your conversation about socialism and capitalism, where we're at right now, marrying the two, and we can talk about that here in a second, marrying the two and getting the best out of both political philosophies. How do you square this with someone that would say it's impossible for the U.S. government to do that? Obviously, we're the largest economy in the world, $19 trillion. What would you give them, a quick elevator pitch, if you will? Because obviously, when you're on the road and you're shaking hands and talking to these folks, that's going to be a common question.
Oh yeah, and I talk about it all the time that we are the richest and most advanced economy in the history of the world. As you say, our economy is now more than $19 trillion, up $5 trillion in the last 12 years alone. We can easily afford a dividend of $1,000 a month for every American adult, particularly because so much of that money is going to get spent right here in our Main Street economies around the country. The great thing about it, in terms of its real-life impact, it makes children and families healthier and stronger.
Yeah.
It empowers millions of American women who right now are in exploitative or abusive jobs or relationships to be able to improve their situations and walk away. It helps people in the LGBTQ community because people of that community are more likely to be fired from jobs and kicked out of the house. And so it gives them the ability to become more resilient and able to move to better situations. It helps communities of color who have historically lower access to education, resources, and opportunities to be able to improve their situations as well. So it addresses a lot of the needs that we already know we have in our society. And when people say, well, we can't afford that, one thing I say is, look, we printed $4 trillion for the banks during the bailout, and there was no inflation as a result of that.
Right.
And in this case, the money would go much more effectively and efficiently into the economy. Everyone knows that right now 78% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. 57% can't afford an unexpected $500 bill. So we know that if we put this money into Americans' hands, it's going to go right back into the economy.
And speak a little bit, because what's so unique about you, and I want to talk about Venture for America here in a second, but you're a small business owner yourself, or a business owner. I don't even know how small it is. But you have paid paychecks. You have signed, you have signed budgets. You understand how to make sure everything is on the up and up. How has that business experience been able to translate itself in this political realm?
Well, I was a small business owner for years, and I love small businesses. I think small businesses are the lifeblood of the economy in many communities.
Yeah.
And if they can create jobs for people that people enjoy, it's really the best path forward. And so a lot of American voters really respond very positively to that, because when I meet with small business owners in Ohio or Iowa or New Hampshire, I naturally speak their language.
Right.
And one of the issues with some of the policies that are being put forward, like I agree 100% with the spirit of $15 an hour minimum wage.
Sure.
But the reality for many small businesses is that they're paying less than that. Let's call it $9 or $10 an hour, and that change actually would be very significant in terms of their bottom line. And so they'd cut back shifts,
right?
Or they might, they might try and make do with fewer people. It's much better to pass a universal basic income of $1,000 a month and just get money directly into people's hands.
Yep.
And then the small business owner benefits because their customers have more money instead of trying to get money to people through the minimum wage itself. Though, again, I'm for the spirit of a higher minimum wage. No one should be working full time in this country and be poor. But some of our policies kind of imagine that small businesses have the wherewithal to do things that some of them may not have.
Well, Mr. Yang, thank you so much for bringing that up, because that was actually going to be my next question. Would this offset or make it not needed to do a $15 minimum wage? Because, obviously I completely agree with you with the spirit. I think workers need more money. They need more rights. Amazon is criminal the way that they treat their employees. Mom and pop businesses, you have to understand, and I'm sure you do, when you run a muffin joint, all of a sudden $15 minimum wage. Well, before it was $7.50, but now the porter has to get $15 minimum wage if you run a bar, and now the chef, if you have a restaurant, is going to be like, I'm not making the same as the porter. So now they want $25, and it goes up exponentially. So it really isn't just a $15 minimum wage. And I think one of the ironies is that allows for Amazon, that allows for Walmart, that allows for these huge corporations who can afford $15 minimum wages to just move in and destroy everything.
Yeah, and so it's much more efficient just to put money directly into the hands of workers through something like a citizen's dividend. And the great thing, too, is that also encompasses people who are doing work that right now is not recognized by our society as work.
Right.
And the example I use is my wife, who's at home with our two boys, one of whom is autistic. It's not like a higher minimum wage helps her,
right?
Because her work right now is not considered by society as an actual job, even though I would argue that the work she's doing is as important or more important than the work that I was doing as a corporate lawyer, for example. That was very remunerative. I was a lawyer for 5 unhappy months, so please don't look at me and be like, I didn't know that dude was a lawyer. It was 5 months in like the late 90s. But I was just using that as an example. It's like the market is a very imperfect determinant of the value of our work, and it could be that there are many things that we want to reward that a minimum wage would not touch.
Man, I'll tell you, as someone who just wants to be a stay-at-home dog dad and just kind of work on my little writings and things like that, I love this idea. And it's not just for it's for any stay-at-home jobs are jobs. It's not that's not just a common cliche. So
and to your point, I just want to say this too. This would be an explosion of arts, creativity, journalism, caregiving, coaching, nurturing, like all of the core human activities that we want to do would flourish in a country where we had this dividend. And that's what I'm going to make happen as president in 2021.
Well, I completely understand where you're coming from. We talk about new economies. Obviously, the old argument or the old, I guess, sort of analogy is in 1900, it was mostly farm work. It was mostly an agriculture-based society. Now it's 3% is farm work. And you would just ask those people in 1900, be like, so there's only 3% of these jobs left. What are you going to do? They wouldn't understand that we need coders. We need, a whole series of other professions that simply, an Uber driver that simply did not exist. So Etsy, these small businesses that people can create from their home, I do agree with you. I think that is the future for people to create happiness in their lives and steady income.
Yeah, and if you look at Etsy as an example, and I use it in my book, fewer than 15% of businesses on Etsy produce anywhere near like a living wage, and virtually none of them have insurance benefits.
Right.
And so Etsy can be our future if we're not presenting these visions that it's going to be the equivalent of a full-time income. And that's why something like having a universal basic income of $12,000 a year then makes it much more feasible. Because then if you have two adults in the house, $24,000, then your Etsy business doesn't need to bring in, $50,000 to be able to make it viable. You can produce things you love, and if it produces $25,000 worth of revenue in a given year, you can still live a very happy, productive life.
Right.
And so that's the kind of thing that we should be making more possible for people without pretending that folks are going to be able to produce a full income right now, from their home in many situations.
Well, let's stick with jobs, and then I want to ask a little bit about healthcare because that's going to be extremely well expressed here in 2019. So, Venture for America, what is VFA? What inspired you to get involved with this or create this? And what's the ultimate mission?
So it was 2011, and the financial crisis had just transpired, and I was very despondent about the direction of the country. And one of the problems I saw was that many smart, ambitious, enterprising young people were heading to Wall Street and big consulting firms in Silicon Valley.
Right.
And so I thought, well, what would be a better use of their talents and energy? And so I created Venture for America to help train entrepreneurs in places like Detroit, Cleveland, New Orleans, Birmingham, Baltimore, with the idea, and in a way, it was really a response to the financial crisis, but in many ways, it sort of presaged the rise of Donald Trump. I spent the last 6 years working in Michigan, Ohio, Missouri, Alabama, and we helped create several thousand jobs in those cities. Right. That's why I was appointed this ambassador of entrepreneurship by the Obama administration. And so my goal was to try and help balance the brain drain out of many regions and reverse it, and hopefully channel more energy and resources to places that could use a boost.
Absolutely. I think that is that's wonderful. That's the Lord's work, because we travel all around this country and the world, traveling around for our live shows, and we just see certain places that have just been destroyed, decimated by the economic situation now. And we talk about Wall Street might be going up, up, and up, and all the numbers are coming in. This economy is great. Well, there's a lot of folks who aren't seeing it. And I think those people are looking for someone to speak up for them a little bit. And oftentimes, as I mentioned earlier, immigrants get a scapegoat. But can you talk a little bit about the correlation in maybe areas that supported Donald Trump and the rise of technology? Is there a direct correlation between unemployment or less employment and the rise of automation?
Yeah, there's a direct relationship where if you look at the voting district data, there's a straight line up between the adoption of industrial robots in a region and the movement towards Donald Trump. And again, if you look at where we decimated these manufacturing jobs, it was in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Missouri, Iowa, the entire set of swing states that Trump needed to win. And now, unfortunately, we're going to do the same thing to retail jobs, call center jobs, truck driving jobs, fast food jobs, and on and on. So I had the same experience you did, where when I went to other parts of the country, I was blown away by the disparities between Missouri and Manhattan, or San Francisco and Ohio, where when you go between those two places, and you've had this experience, it sounds like, you feel like you're traversing dimensions and decades, and not just a couple of time zones. And it gets even more extreme when you leave those metropolitan areas and go to rural communities on the outskirts. So when people think about why Donald Trump's our president, there is rampant suffering and financial insecurity in this country. Many people feel left behind. Right. And you can see it in the darkest of stats, where suicides are at a record high, drug overdoses 8 an hour, to the point where it's actually depressing. Our life expectancy has declined for the last 3 years as a country. The first time that's happened in 100 years. And 100 years ago, it was the Spanish flu of 1918. We are actually in Spanish flu territory.
And is that mostly suicide? Is that the reason that we're seeing life expectancy go down? Is it mostly self-harm and suicide?
It is mostly deaths of despair, which are drug overdoses and suicides. Both of those have overtaken vehicle deaths for the first time in American history as causes of death. So we are disintegrating by the numbers. We are falling apart. And anyone who wants to see why Donald Trump became president, all you have to do is go to some of these communities, and you will see very, very clearly.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned, because I watched a lot of your YouTube interviews, and so you mentioned Americans, and kind of to that point, when we travel around and you just say, oh my, I would love to pick everyone up and be like, let's get working again, but there are no jobs. This mindset of scarcity. You mentioned a mindset of scarcity within the American people. We don't have enough. There isn't enough money to go around, all these things. But as you also mentioned, we got a $19 trillion economy, biggest economy in the world. Can you explain a little bit what you mean when you say mindset of scarcity?
Yeah, so we've all experienced a mindset of scarcity in our own ways. If you can't pay your bills, you start making all of these time-money trade-offs where you think, oh, if I pay this, I can't pay that. And maybe if I take extra time to do this, it'll be cheaper, it'll save me this much. And when you start getting into that mindset, you actually have less bandwidth to be able to make rational decisions.
Right.
Studies have shown that being in this mindset will decrease your functional intelligence by 13 points or 1 standard deviation.
Wow.
And so if you feel like America is getting less rational, less reasonable, more subject to bad ideas, and even more xenophobic and racist,
right,
it's because we've introduced pervasive financial insecurity into our country where, again, 57% can't pay an unexpected $500 bill and 78% are living paycheck to paycheck.
Wow.
And so that is the real challenge. The reason I'm so passionate about this freedom dividend or universal basic income of $1,000 a month is that we need to get the boot off of people's throats.
Yeah.
We need to let people think clearly. And then after they think clearly, then we'll be able to make progress on the big challenges like climate change,
right,
and other 21st century challenges. But the first big move we have to make is we have to evolve in our notions of human value and
right,
what work looks like, that it's not just show up in 9 to 5. We have to evolve past this labor subsistence model where I trade my time for a certain amount of money I need to survive. And then we do that over and over again, right, because increasingly, if the trucks start driving themselves, like what are 3.5 million former truckers really going to do?
Right, exactly.
Being a retail worker is the most common job in this country, and 30% of malls are going to close in the next 5 years. So we need to grow up.
Yeah.
And that's really the central mission of my campaign, is to try and help us confront the real challenges of today.
Yeah, my father was a truck driver, and so that really hits home. I mean, and that's a job that's extremely difficult to do, and they make $70K a year if it's a really good company.
Yeah, no, they can. They do quite well, and so the delta, the drop off, is going to be very high. But I do want to talk about the opposite of a mindset of scarcity, and that's a mindset of abundance, which is what many entrepreneurs have. It's when you think if you make an investment, it's going to pay off, that you can build something and it'll just get better over time.
Right.
And we are losing that mindset. And that's what we need to instill in more Americans and communities. And the great thing is if we accomplish that, then we'll give rise to a whole new level of entrepreneurship and creativity and innovation and artistic pursuits.
Right.
But we need to come together as a country and say, this is the direction we want to go. And that's why I'm running for president, to make that case to the American people.
Well, and I'm really grateful that you are running for president, and hopefully, when you are on center stage for these debates, I think what you're saying is going to resonate with a lot of people, and you're going to surprise a lot of people. One of the quotes that you referenced, and I forget who you quoted in this reference, but I thought it was really interesting, regarding capitalism, because I want to just ask you just briefly about how we get socialism and capitalism to find each other on Tinder, go on a date, and decide to get married.
Yes.
You say we never, the thing about capitalism is we never knew capitalism was going to get eaten by its son, technology. What does that really mean, and how can socialism, like what sectors of our economy would socialism be good for, and then what sectors is just capitalism is the only way to go?
Yeah, so that quote is from a guy named Eric Weinstein. And what he's talking about is that many of the economic relationships we take for granted with capitalism are now breaking down. So here's a set of relationships we used to take for granted. If I build a highly successful, profitable company, I'm going to need to hire lots of people.
Right.
And then when I hire lots of people, I'm going to need to pay them and treat them moderately well and make it so that they can afford to buy my goods. And I'm going to care about the communities that we live and work in.
Right.
Today, I can create a highly profitable company that does not employ lots of people. If it does employ people, I can make them all gig workers and contractors. And I don't care if they can afford my goods because I'm selling around the world to people that may or may not be in my own backyard. So all of these assumptions we make about relationships are dying before our eyes.
Yeah.
And so what we need to do is we need to take the best of both worlds in terms of capitalism and socialism. So people regard me as championing Medicare for all, single-payer healthcare, which I do, and people associate that with being a democratic socialist. I'm not interested in labels, but it's completely obvious to me that we need to have a single-payer public option in this country to both bring down costs and expand access in healthcare. So that's something that people would associate with socialists. In terms of capitalism, we need to try and harness the power of the markets to actually improve how we are doing. Our mental health, our physical health, our environmental health, the levels of engagement we have with work. The problem is right now we're chasing GDP and capital efficiency and stock market prices when none of those things have any relationship to how 80% of Americans are doing.
Right.
And so what we do is we harness capitalism, but we say, look, the purpose is not raise GDP. The purpose is to raise our quality adjusted life expectancy. The purpose is to raise childhood success rates. The purpose is to improve our mental health and bring down our overdose rate. And then if you use those as your measurements, then you can get entrepreneurs and organizations and companies innovating in ways that actually help us instead of, frankly, ways that marginalize us and make us less relevant. Because the smartest humans, the smartest radiologists cannot out-diagnose an artificial intelligence that can see shades of gray on a film that the human eye cannot, and can reference millions of data points when a doctor can only reference thousands.
Right.
So it's no longer about some kind of archaic notion of meritocracy anymore.
Right.
Like, we have to try to evolve our very definitions of what progress looks like. Yeah. And that sounds very difficult. It sounds very futuristic, but it's actually pretty easy. We made up GDP almost 100 years ago during the Great Depression. And so when I'm president in 2021, I'm just going to go down the street to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics and say, hey guys, GDP has not been updated in 100 years. So now we're going to update it, and we're going to include childhood success rates and environmental standards and mental health. And then we're going to build an American scorecard. And then I'm going to present on those levels and measurements every year at the State of the Union. And then we're going to drive resources to try and improve them. We're going to reward companies that are able to demonstrate that they're actually helping communities. Because I know CEOs, and even the best of them feel like their hands are tied because they have to optimize for profitability every quarter.
Right.
And so if you say, look, you can optimize for more things now. Like if you do something great in the community and we can tell that it's real, then we can give you a giant tax break for that, or a giant, way to decrease your expenses.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely. So when it comes to Medicare for All, just lastly, what's the best way to implement that, do you think? Because I know there's a couple of different ideas as far as how would you do it?
Yeah, so I think that you need to have a public option that negotiates lower rates. And the simplest way to do that is to lower the eligibility age for Medicare over time. You have a transition where more and more people are part of the pool. And if you are representing the American people, you kind of need younger, healthier workers, because then it brings down the rates very, very fast. I would not outlaw private insurance, but the fact is most private insurers would disappear, except for a handful of concierge-type gold-plated insurers that have wealthy corporate clients. But having that private insurance exist, one, it's America, and you know that stuff's going to exist, in my opinion.
Of course.
But there's actually a public benefit, because if you have parallel resources working on various innovations over time, the public's going to benefit from that. So to me, the move is to lower the eligibility age over time and have a robust public option. Don't make private insurance illegal, but most of it would disappear over time.
Right. Andrew Yang, a Democratic candidate for president. Really awesome speaking with you. Thank you so much for taking the time. I would assume you have a very busy schedule right now because, you're getting your name out there. And thank you so much for coming on this show and talking to our audience.
Such a pleasure. And if anyone wants to find out more, go to yang2020.com. I've got 75 different policy proposals. I'm not just the universal basic income guy. Right. And if you'd like to see me on this debate stage in June, if you go to our website and make even a $1 donation, you can be part of us reaching the threshold we need. But we're going to get there. We're getting thousands of donations a day, which I'm very, very grateful for.
Awesome.
So we should break through the threshold by the end of March, it looks like.
No, and I looked at your website, and I was so happy it had policies, because so many of them that I've looked at just have the donate button with nothing else, and I'm like, who am I giving to? Like, what is happening? So thank you for being so transparent with your ideas and not being afraid of sharing them with everyone and backing them up with actual information that makes them seem completely reasonable and rational, because it's an uphill battle to find rationality in this country right now. So thank you so much.
No problem.
Andrew Yang, thank you, my man. I'll see you soon.
No doubt. Great to be here. Thank you.
All right, there it was, the interview with Andrew Yang. Wonderful stuff. Go to his website, yang2020.com. Give a donation. He is almost there, and he will be on the debate stage in June and July. So that is very cool stuff, and I love it very much. So there it is, Andrew Yang. Check him out if you haven't already, yang2020.com. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Abraham Lincoln's Top Hat. I hope you enjoyed it. We will talk to you soon. Rate and review on iTunes. Is that what people say? I think people say rate and review on iTunes. Honestly, that would be really kick-ass if you did it. Because then our number, we're doing great on iTunes, but it's fun to beat the big ones. It's fun to beat the so-called big names. They know we're coming. We are the big name around in the world. That's what I say. All right, everyone. I love you so much. I will talk to you soon. Hail yourselves.
This show is made possible by listeners like you. Thanks to our ad sponsors, you can support our shows by supporting them. For more shows like the one you just listened to, go to lastpodcastnetwork.com.